Honorable Director Sir, respected Principal Ma'am, all worthy teachers and my dear friends, first of all a wonderful morning to all of you. My name is Sakshi, I study in 11th Commerce and today I am here for speech on the topic collection of data. First of all, we should know about what is data. Data is all about meaningful and useful information which is collected from the items of the population or the universe. In my definition of data, I use the word population or we can say universe. What do we mean by this? Population or universe is the scope of our investigation. Or we can say that it includes all the items which we have to investigate in the class or in our population. Now, I will tell you about example of data. For example, we collect data about the unique grade of class 12th Commerce. Now, our population is only class 12th Commerce. We cannot collect our data from 11th class or 10th class. This specify our population or we can say our universe. Now, we will talk about types of data. There are two types of data, primary data and secondary data. Primary data is the data which is collected from primary source. It is collected by the investigator himself for the very first time for his personal purpose and it is collected from beginning to the end. For example, we collect data about the economics test result of class 12th Commerce. Here we collect the data and it is collected from its original source, that is 12th Commerce class. Now in my definition of primary data, I use the word primary source. What do we mean by it? Primary source is a source from which primary data is collected. It is the source of origin or it is the source of originality of the data. For example, in the 12th Commerce from whom we have collected our data is the primary source. Now we will talk about secondary data. Secondary data is the data which is collected from secondary source and a department or institute who is already in possession of the data. It is not collected for the very first time, it is already in existence and it is not original. First, it is collected for some other purpose and we are using it for some other purpose. Here, now I will tell you about secondary source. Secondary source is a source from which secondary data is collected. It refers to any department or institution from which have possession of data already. They collect the data for their own purpose and we are using the data for our own personal purpose. Now I will tell you about example of secondary data. Such as from a newspaper we collect data about the sales of a company. Here the newspaper is secondary source and the data collected about the sales of a company is secondary data. Some of the sources of secondary data are government publications, international publications, research and scholars publication, newspaper, journal, etc. Now I will tell you about source of primary data. The first one is direct personal investigation. In direct personal investigation, the investigator is in direct contact with the respondent and asks the required question about his inquiry. Now the second one is indirect oral investigation. In this type of investigation, the respondent is not in direct contact with the investigator and the investigator collects various information about his inquiry about other person who are in possession of that required information. Now the third source of primary data is from external source. In the source, we do not collect the data from the required respondent but we collect the data from other person who are in possession of that data. Now our fifth source of primary data is through questionnaire or schedule. In this type of data, we prepare a set of questions which are known as questionnaire and ask the required answer from our respondent. Now the sixth one is from mailing and telephone. In mailing, we just mail our questionnaire or schedule to the respondent and he filled it in the required time. In telephonic interview, we just call the respondent and ask about the required information. Now I will tell you about the major difference between primary data and secondary data. First of all, primary data is original and it is collected from primary source. Whereas secondary data is not original, it is already in existence and collected from secondary source. Primary data is easy to collect, whereas secondary data is difficult to collect. Primary data is very costly, but secondary data is very economically. This is all about my topic. Thank you.